The history of Egypt under the Muhammad Ali Pasha dynasty spanned the later period of Ottoman Egypt, the Cultivate of Egypt under British patronage, and the nominally independent Sultanate of Egypt and Kingdom of Egypt, ending with the Revolution of 1952 and the formation of the Republic of Egypt. Muhammad Ali's rise to power. The process of Muhammad Ali's seizure of power was a long three-way civil war between the Ottoman Turks, Egyptian Mamluks, and Albanian mercenaries. It lasted from 1803 to 1807, with the Albanian Muhammad Ali Pasha taking control of Egypt in 1805, when the Ottoman Sultan acknowledged his position. Thereafter, Muhammad Ali was the undisputed master of Egypt, and his efforts henceforth were directed primarily to the maintenance of his practical independence. Egypt under Muhammad Ali. Campaign against the Saudis. Ottoman-Saudi War in 1811–18 was fought between Egypt under the reign of Muhammad Ali and the Wahhabis of Hijaz. When Wahhabis captured Mecca in 1802, the Ottoman Sultan ordered Muhammad Ali of Egypt to start moving against Wahhabis to reconquer Mecca and return the honor of the Ottoman Empire. First Arabian campaign acknowledging the sovereignty of the Ottoman Sultan, and at the commands of the Ottoman Porte. In 1811, Muhammad Ali dispatched an army of 20,000 men under the command of his son Tahsin, a youth of 16, against the Saudis in the Ottoman-Saudi War. After a successful advance, this force met with a serious repulse at the Battle of Al-Safra, and retreated to Yanbu. In the end of the year, Tahsin, having received reinforcements, again assumed the offensive and captured Medina after a prolonged siege. He next took Jeddah and Mecca, defeating the Saudi beyond the latter and capturing their general. But some mishaps followed, and Muhammad Ali, who had determined to conduct the war in person, left Egypt in the summer of 1813, leaving his other son Ibrahim in charge of the country. He encountered serious obstacles in Arabia, predominantly stemming from the nature of the country and the harassing mode of warfare adopted by his adversaries. But on the whole his forces proved superior to those of the enemy. He deposed and exiled the Sharif of Mecca, and after the death of the Saudi leader Saud, he concluded a treaty with Saud's son and successor, Abdullah I, in 1815. Following reports that the Turks, whose cause he was upholding in Arabia, were treacherously planning an invasion of Egypt, and hearing of the escape of Napoleon from Elba and fearing danger to Egypt from France or Britain, Muhammad Ali returned to Cairo by way of Qasir and Kenna, reaching the capital on the day of the Battle of Waterloo. Second Arabian campaign. Tahsin returned to Egypt on hearing of the military revolt at Cairo, but died in 1816 at the early age of 20. Muhammad Ali, dissatisfied with the treaty concluded with the Saudis, and with the non-fulfillment of certain of its clauses, determined to send another army to Arabia, and to include in it the soldiers who had recently proved unruly. This expedition, under his eldest son Ibrahim Pasha, left in the autumn of 1816. The war was long and arduous, but in 1818 Ibrahim captured the Saudi capital of Diriyah. Abdullah I, their chief, was made prisoner and with his treasurer and secretary was sent to Istanbul, where, in spite of Ibrahim's promise of safety and of Muhammad Ali's intercession in their favor, they were put to death. At the close of the year 1819 Ibrahim returned to, having subdued all opposition in Arabia, reforms while the process had begun in 1808. Muhammad Ali's representative at Cairo had completed the confiscation of almost all the lands belonging to private individuals. While he was absent in Arabia, the former owners were forced to accept inadequate pensions instead. By this revolutionary method of land nationalization, Muhammad Ali became proprietor of nearly all the soil of Egypt. During Ibrahim's engagement in the Second Arabian Campaign, the Pasha turned his attention to further strengthening the Egyptian economy and his control over it. He created state monopolies for the chief products of the country, and up a number of factories. In 1819 he began digging the new Mahmudiya Canal to Alexandria, named after the reigning Sultan of Turkey. The old canal had long fallen into decay, and the necessity of providing a safe channel between Alexandria and the Nile was much felt. The conclusion of the commercial Treaty of Balta-Liman in 1838 between Turkey and Britain, negotiated by Sir Henry Bulwer, struck the death knell to the system of monopolies, though its application regarding Egypt was delayed for some years, and finally included foreign intervention. Another notable addition to the economic progress of the country was the development of cotton cultivation in the Nile Delta starting in 1822. The cotton seed for the new crop had been brought from the Sudan by Maho Bey, and with the organization of the new irrigation and industry, Muhammad Ali was able to extract considerable revenue in a few years' time. Other domestic efforts were made to promote education and the study of medicine. Muhammad Ali showed much favor to European merchants, on whom he was dependent for the sale of his monopoly exports, and under his influence the port of Alexandria again rose into importance. It was also under Muhammad Ali's encouragement that the overland transit of goods from Europe to India via Egypt was resumed. The Pasha also attempted to reorganize his troops along European lines, but this led to a formidable mutiny in Cairo. Muhammad Ali's life was endangered, and he sought refuge by night in the citadel, while the soldiers committed many acts of plunder. The effects of the revolt were reduced by gifts to the insurgents' leaders. Muhammad Ali also ordered that those who suffered from the disturbances should receive compensation from the state treasury. The conscription portion of the Nizam I ceded was temporarily abandoned, as consequence of this mutiny. Invasion of Libya and Sudan in 1820. Muhammad Ali gave orders to commence the conquest of eastern Libya. He first sent an expedition westward which conquered and annexed the Siwa oasis. Ali's intentions for Sudan was to extend his rule southward, to capture the valuable caravan trade bound for the Red Sea, and to secure the rich gold mines which he believed to exist in Senna. He also saw in the campaign a means of getting rid of his disaffected troops, and of obtaining a sufficient number of captives to form the nucleus of the new army. The forces destined for this service were led by Ismail, the youngest son of Muhammad Ali. They consisted of between 4,000 and 5,000 men, being Turks and Arabs. They left Cairo in July 1820. Nubia at once submitted. The Shajir Arabs immediately beyond the province of Dongola were defeated. The remnant of the Mamluks dispersed, and Senna was reduced without a battle. Muhammad Bey, the Deftadar, with another force of about the same strength, was then sent by Muhammad Ali against Kurdistan with like result, but not without a hard-fought engagement. In October 1822, Ismail, with his retinue, was burnt to death by Nimr, the Mek of Shendi. Following this incident, the Deftadar, a man infamous for his cruelty, assumed the command of those provinces, and exacted terrible retribution from the inhabitants. Khartoum was founded at this time, and in the following years the rule of the Egyptians was greatly extended and control of the Red Sea ports of Suakin and Massawa obtained. Armored revolt in 1824. A native rebellion broke out in Upper Egypt headed by one Ahmad, an inhabitant of Al-Salamiyah, a village situated a few miles above Thebes. He proclaimed himself a prophet, and was soon followed by between 20,000 and 30,000 insurgents, mostly peasants, but some of them deserters from the Nizam Gedid, for that force was yet in a half-organized state. The peasants were angered by many of Ali's reforms, especially the introduction of conscription and the increase in taxes and forced labor. The insurrection was crushed by Muhammad Ali, and about one-fourth of Ahmad's followers perished, but he himself escaped and was never heard of again. Few of these unfortunates possessed any other weapon than the long staff of the Egyptian peasant, still they offered an obstinate resistance, and the combat in which they were defeated resembled a massacre. This movement was the last internal attempt to destroy the Pasha's authority. The subsequent years saw an imposition of order across Egypt, and Ali's new highly trained and disciplined forces spread across the nation. Public order was rendered perfect. The Nile and the highways were secure to all travelers, Christian or Muslim. The Bedouin tribes were won over to peaceful pursuits. Greek campaign. Muhammad Ali was fully conscious that the empire which he had so laboriously built up might at any time have to be defended by force of arms against his master Sultan Mahmud II, whose whole policy had been directed to curbing the power of his two ambitious vassals, and who was under the influence of the personal enemies of the Pasha of Egypt, notably of Husrev Pasha, the Grand Vizier, who had never forgiven his humiliation in Egypt in 1803. Mahmud also was already planning reforms borrowed from the West, and Muhammad Ali, who had plenty of opportunity of observing the superiority of European methods of warfare, was determined to anticipate the Sultan in the creation of a fleet and an army on European lines, partly as a measure of precaution, partly as an instrument for the realization of yet wider schemes of ambition. Before the outbreak of the War of Greek Independence in 1821, he had already expended much time and energy in organizing a fleet and in training, under the supervision of French instructors, native officers and artificers, though it was not till 1829 that the opening of a dockyard and arsenal at Alexandria enabled him to build and equip his own vessels. By 1823, moreover, he had succeeded in carrying out the reorganization of his army on European lines, the turbulent Turkish and Albanian elements being replaced by Sudanese and Falahin. The effectiveness of the new force was demonstrated in the suppression of an 1823 revolt of the Albanians in Cairo by 6 disciplined Sudanese regiments, after which Muhammad Ali was no more troubled with military mutinies. His foresight was rewarded by the invitation of the Sultan to help him in the task of subduing the Greek insurgents, offering as reward the Pashaliks of the Morea and of Syria. Muhammad Ali had already, in 1821, been appointed by him governor of Crete, which he had occupied with a small Egyptian force. In the autumn of 1824, a fleet of 60 Egyptian warships carrying a large force of 17,000 disciplined troops concentrated in Suda Bay, and, in the following March, with Ibrahim as commander-in-chief, landed in the Morea. His naval superiority wrested from the Greeks the command of a great deal of the sea, on which the fate of the insurrection ultimately depended, while on land the Greek irregular bands, having largely soundly beaten the Porte's troops, had finally met a worthy foe in Ibrahim's disciplined troops. The history of the events that led up to the Battle of Navarino and the liberation of Greece is told elsewhere. The withdrawal of the Egyptians from the Morea was ultimately due to the action of Admiral Sir Edward Codrington, who early in August 1828 appeared before Alexandria and induced the Pasha, by no means sorry to have a reasonable excuse, by a threat of bombardment, to sign a convention undertaking to recall Ibrahim and his army. But for the action of European powers, it is suspected by many that the Ottoman Empire might have defeated the Greeks. War with the Sultan. Ali went to war against the Sultan in order to obtain raw materials lacking in Egypt and a captive market for Egypt's new industrial output. From fall 1831 to December 1832, Ibrahim led the Egyptian army through Lebanon and Syria and across the Taurus Mountains into Anatolia, where he defeated the Ottoman forces and pushed on to Kütahya, only 150 miles from Istanbul. For the next 10 years, relations between the Sultan and the Pasha remained in the forefront of the questions which agitated the diplomatic world. It was not only the very existence of the Ottoman Empire that seemed to be at stake, but Egypt itself had become more than ever the object of international attention, to British statesmen especially, and in the issue of the struggle were involved the interests of Britain in the two routes to India by the Isthmus of Suez and the valley of the Euphrates. Ibrahim, who once more commanded in his father's name, launched another brilliant campaign beginning with the storming of Acre on May 27, 1832, and culminating in the rout and capture of Reshid Pasha at Konya on December 21. Soon after, he was blocked by the intervention of Russia, however, as the result of endless discussions between the representatives of the powers, the Porte and the Pasha. The Convention of Kütahya was signed on May 14, 1833, by which the Sultan agreed to bestow on Muhammad Ali the Pashaliks of Syria, Damascus, Aleppo and Italy, together with the district of Adana. The announcement of the Pasha's appointment had already been made in the usual way in the annual firman issued on May 3. Adana was bestowed on Ibrahim under the style of Mahazal, or collector of the crown revenues. A few days later, Muhammad Ali now ruled over a virtually independent empire, stretching from the Sudan to the Taurus Mountains, subject only to a moderate annual tribute. However, the unsound foundations of his authority were not long in revealing themselves. Scarcely a year from the signing of the Convention of Kütahya, the application by Ibrahim of Egyptian methods of government, notably of the monopolies and conscription, had driven Syrians, Druze and Arabs, into revolt. After first welcoming him as a deliverer, the unrest was suppressed by Muhammad Ali in person, and the Syrians were terrorized. But their discontent encouraged the Sultan Mahmud to hope for revenge, and a renewal of the conflict was only staved off by the anxious efforts of the European powers. In the spring of 1839, the Sultan ordered his army, concentrated under Reshid in the border district of Bur on the Euphrates, to advance over the Syrian frontier. Ibrahim, seeing his flank menaced, attacked it at Nezib on the 24th of June. Once more the Ottomans were utterly routed. 6 days later, before the news reached Constantinople, Mahmud died. Now, with the defeat of the Ottomans and the conquest of Syria, Muhammad Ali had reached the height of his power. For one brief moment in time, he had become the envy of the Egyptian kings of antiquity, controlling Egypt, the Sudan, and Syria. He saw the Ottoman armies collapse or fall into disorganization after their defeat in Syria, and it looked like the Middle East and Anatolia were his for the taking. It looked like he could march all the way to Istanbul, in the minds of some, and place himself on the Sultan's throne. With the Ottoman Empire at the feet of Muhammad Ali, the European powers were greatly alarmed and issued the Convention of London of 1840, designed to end the war and deal with the likely contingency of Muhammad Ali's refusal. Their intervention during the Oriental Crisis of 1840 was prompt, launching an invasion by a primarily British force. They made short work of Muhammad Ali's pride and joy, Egypt's modern armed forces. However, while his army was being defeated, Muhammad saw the possibility of victory in France's unwillingness to participate. However, in spite of France's dislike of an Egypt dominated by the British, it was equally unwilling to allow the ambitious governor to upset the balance of power, and thus, by waiting for the hope of a better chance at victory, Muhammad Ali had to suffer a harder defeat. However, though he had lost Syria and his position of great power, the war with the West had not been a complete disaster by any means. For though humiliated and defeated by the Western powers, the West had no intention of removing him and the block he placed on Ottoman power. Thus, though the peace treaty was harsh, it achieved one of Muhammad Ali's greatest dreams: to place his family firmly in the reins of Egyptian power. It was far from all that the crafty Pasha had wanted, but it was what he had to live with, for even in the ending days of the Syrian war, Muhammad was starting to show his age, and would find that he did not have much time left in the world.